If you need, there we go. So there we go. So if you need to leave and come back later, there will be a recording so you can hear your question answered, even if you aren't able to stay with us live. All right, compost and composting. So there's a lot, composting has really kind of come to the forefront, even in the 4 years that I've been doing this. And what I noticed is a lot of people describe composting as a lot of different things. So technically in the dictionary, composting is the process at the farm, the process where we work to speed up the natural cycle of decay. You can read it right there, but basically letting the microorganisms do their thing and convert the nitrogen and carbon into compost. Compost, the noun, is this nutrient-rich soil amendment that helps return vital nutrients back to the soil. So composting, the verb, is about the process to create that compost, but it's also commonly used to describe separating your food waste at your house and putting it either into your backyard, or if you're working with another compost, into a bucket. So sometimes people are like, oh, I'm composting at home. They may mean that they have a backyard system up and running, or they may mean that they're just separating their food. At some point as an industry, we may need to come up with some new terminology, but for now, it's a little bit, it can get redundant. And then I share this fun fact because I think it's amazing. Composting feels new, but it's actually so old. This practice has been around forever. And they have found evidence of sustainable gardening tips recorded on clay tablets from the Mesopotamian Akkadian Empire dating back to 2334 BC. So composting and this practice of using what's left from our food to re-energize and re-nutrient our soil has been around since the beginning of time. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington were also avid composters because they were farmers and very focused on their yield and maintaining the health of the soil as well. So why should you compost? If you're not farming today, why? So save money. Compost is free, does take a little effort, a little DIY, but with compost, you're not going to have to go out and purchase chemical fertilizers. You can save resources. We're keeping the nutrients in your food from landfills, where I'll get into what happens to it in landfills. It also saves water. Water helps retain moisture in our soil, so you can use less water for gardening. Extend the life of our landfills. Landfills aren't my favorite thing in the world, but they are necessary. And right now landfilling costs are going up quite a bit, especially in our area. And we are going to run out of room, and we're going to have to make tough choices about whether we expand, open new landfills, or come up with alternatives. So approximately 40% of our residential waste is compostable. 22% is food alone. When you combine yard waste and some other paper products, that number increases dramatically. So imagine if we could take 40% out of what we're currently sending to landfills and incinerators and recycle it. That's really what composting can do. You can improve your soil. So composting is a natural way to amend your soil, to add the nutrients back, to increase your yield, and to add organic matter back to the soils, which are generally very depleted. And then reduce our impact. So landfilling, which most of our trash in Haverford Township, and I live in Lower Merion, but it's the same, most of it is incinerated. And that has a lot of environmental justice issues and health issues in terms of a waste disposal method. In addition, food waste is 75 to sometimes 99% water. So food waste is a terrible candidate for incineration because of the energy required to incinerate those materials. They call them waste to energy stations, but it's upside down when it comes to incinerating food waste. On the landfill side, you may have heard that landfills are a large emitter of methane. And what you might not know, it's actually our food waste sent to the landfill that creates this problem. So everyone thinks they send their food to the landfill and it biodegrades naturally, but that's actually not true. So landfills are designed to store our trash. They're not meant to process it in any way. And what happens every day or every couple days is they seal it with a layer of plastic and then a layer of dirt. And on they go, making trash lasagna. What happens over time is there's no water or air in the environment. So organic materials can't biodegrade properly. Instead, they undergo anaerobic decomposition, which then releases methane gas. That has to be pumped out because it is combustible. And that's where the methane comes from. So the wild thing is if we redirected food and organics from landfills, we would also start to solve the methane problem and then rescue those nutrients and return them back to the soils. So to me, composting, it's gotta go. And I'm excited you're all here to get in on the fun. Little bit more about kind of the 2 points that I was just discussing. Here on the right, one person's trash is another person's black gold. As you see, these are a breakdown of what's actually in our trash and how much of it could be composted. And then on the left, you see just all of the beneficial uses for compost. So not only are we keeping this waste out of landfills and incinerators that create all kinds of issues, but we're also using it for an amazing purpose. We're creating compost, which has applications in everything from stormwater management to agriculture to your backyard. So it's a worthwhile endeavor. And yeah, I hope by the end of this, you'll be as excited to get started as I am to talk about it. So one thing I love to highlight before we get into the nitty and the gritty, what's the difference between commercial composting and backyard composting? Because I've seen a lot of people get confused here. Because commercial composting is almost totally different than backyard composting, and in terms of the materials that can be accepted. So on the commercial end, if you're composting with Mother Compost, we can take the compostable containers, compostable bags, some of the compostable plastics, dairy, meats. We don't accept manure, and not all composting sites accept the same thing. But as you can see, we take, if it grows, it goes on the commercial side, usually, by and large. And it's because the piles are enormous. They're maintaining high temperatures over an extended period of time. And then from a finished product standpoint, everything is cured and screened so that there's a very cohesive finished product for the market. In your backyard, it's going to be totally different. So you have to really pay attention to what you're adding. Do not add anything with fat content, any meats, seafood, dairy, nothing cooked. You know, you have to really go for raw food and vegetables, and even things like rinds, seeds, be a little careful about. We'll get into the specifics, but the point being, if someone's composting with a service like Mother Compost and you're composting in your backyard, that doesn't mean that you're composting the same things. Because again, you just need to be pay a little bit more attention to what's going in your backyard system. They love variety, so you can get there, you can add volume, but it's not apples to apples. Maintaining high temperatures is possible, absolutely, but it is challenging and does take effort. And then your final product will vary. It's just going to look different. It'll be very hard for you to kind of come out with the same exact looking compost year over year. Although, of course, some people have been very successful at that. So those are very key differences between composting that you should just be aware of, because I've seen people be like, well, my friend puts this in her compost and they're not the same if you're using a service versus in your backyard. All right, so hopefully I didn't just scare you off, because now we're going to talk about getting ready to compost. So there's two types of, what did I do? I was messing with these slides, so sorry about the question marks. That should be a bullet point. But there's two types of backyard composting that we discussed. The add as you go pile, which is a slower processing time. That's you're just putting materials in there, turning it occasionally. You're not overly concerned with the finished product. You're really looking to redirect waste from your kitchen. Not sure like how you're going to use the compost at the end of it, and you just really want to redirect the food and make sure that you're running the process correct. So the expectation here is less onerous in terms of what you need to do to run your pile. You don't have to stockpile a ton. You can usually figure it out. It's just for the quick disposal of your kitchen and yard waste. The issues that you can run into with this kind of model is it does take longer to break down. So you have to have a little bit more patience. It can be more prone to odor issues if you're not turning as regularly, and it can attract pests uncovered. And it doesn't heat up as well. Like you're not going to see consistent high spikes in temperature. It will work though. So I think it's important to understand that it just may not work quickly. So if you right now are trying to have finished product to use in your fall beds, you're going to want to be a little more strategic in how you manage your composting system. I would also say no backyard system, very few backyard systems are going to kill off weed seeds. So I would not put your weeds in a backyard system at all, because you will probably just be seeding your lawn with weeds. It's unfortunate, but true. So that's just something to consider. I know Haverford Township does do some brush collection, but I'm not sure. Joy, will they take the weeds as well if it's in a bag?
Minimal weeds. Like if a can of full weeds is considered trash.
Okay. And then batch processing. So this is where you are strategically managing your pile to get a yield. So you can have finished compost in as little as a month. It does require some strategic planning of green and brown materials, especially the brown. There's a while in our world where leaves are everywhere and plentiful and a simple resource, but in a couple months, there's going to be nothing left. So you need to be strategic with how much brown you're keeping on hand. You can also use shredded newspaper or shredded cardboard. But you may just need to be paying attention to what's coming in your house to make sure that you have what you need on hand. And then during the active phase, when the temperatures are creeping up, it will need a little bit more attention. It'll need turning, it'll need water, especially again during these prior summer months. So sort of like if you're starting a workout plan at the gym, what kind of adventure are we going on? Are you just really trying to redirect the food waste, or are you trying to strategically get a certain amount of compost or just a yield for this season? All right. And with that, we're going to talk about where this should go. If you haven't started composting yet, the location of your bin is crucial because you're going to have to walk out to it a lot. So you want it to be somewhat far away from your house, but not so far that it's going to make you unmotivated to go out there. Best if partially shaded, especially the bins that Haverford Township subsidizes are beautiful, but they are black and they are covered, so they're going to get hot. So you want it to be in some shade because your compost pile does need to be moist at all times to be running effectively. And then, to the next point, it should be near a water source. So you can always mind the rain and try to keep it uncovered when we have rainy seasons, but we had 5 days of rain and then now we're not going to have any for a week. So it's hard to manage that over time. You may need to water it yourself, either from a rain barrel or some other apparatus. You don't want to have to lug it too far. So just keep those things in mind when you're scouting the location for your bin, because it can make a difference. And I think make a difference between whether you enjoy this process or whether it becomes a real pain. And the second it becomes a pain, nobody feels like doing it. So that's an easy way to make it easy to start. Step 2, choose your bin. In Haverford Township, closed bins are required. I know that was change that was on the docket, Joy? I don't know if you want to.
Yes, they're required for any food waste. However, if you want to have compost, if you're one of those people who collects your grass, you can compost grass and other yard material in an open bin. You just can't put food in it.
Perfect. Thanks, Joy. Yeah, so if you are taking this on in Haverford Township, it needs to be a closed bin solution. The closed bin that you see here is actually what I have in my backyard. Very similar to the Haverford Township bin, which I'll show in the next slide. It's great. It does allow continuous composting because, as you can see by this little trapdoor at the bottom, all of the finished product settles to the bottom and then you can scrape it out. So you don't really have to empty and start fresh. The lids and the doors do help mitigate pest issues. I will say it does need to be watered. So that's, even if you're paying attention in the summer, it gets very hot in there and it can be a little challenging to turn everything because of the corners to really mix it up. But I believe the Haverford Township ones are round, so that's probably even better. Tumblers are people's favorite thing to buy, but no, I have very few people actually love using them once they get going for a couple reasons. So they are amazing for batch processing, for that kind of, we're going to aerate and we're going to process things really quickly because you can turn it, you can add water, it's wonderful. But at some point you have to stop adding fresh material or else it just never stops. You always have raw feedstocks in there. So what we recommend, if you do currently have a tumbler, and this is why most people, we call them tumbler twins. People end up with two of them because they're like, all right, I need another one to put all the fresh stuff in. So you have to take a week off, let's call it, turn it, make sure there's enough water in there, because again, it's not getting the amount of water that it needs, most likely just from your food stocks, especially if it's been in there a while. Hold on. I'm not crying, I'm just an allergy sufferer, but excuse me. Although it is terribly sad about the tumblers. So you need to stop adding fresh materials. Someone told me, they're like, it's like a cake, right? You don't keep adding ingredients when it's baking. You gotta give it some time to finish. And it's the same way with the tumbler. So usually take a week to 10 days off. You can freeze your food scraps in the meantime, and then open it, let everything drop to the ground, and then start fresh with a new batch. And you can use some of the compost that you completed in your new batch of compost. So I'm not a huge fan of the tumblers, but I know a lot of people that have them, and they do make aerating and turning very easy. But when you have a beautiful bin like this available, subsidized by the township, it's hard to go wrong. So I'm sure this 40 bins ordered number is way old, Joy, but the other numbers are updated. And Joy, I don't know if you want to kind of take it away.
Yeah, so the Township has been subsidizing these backyard compost bins for a couple of years now. We do order in 40 bin batches. So this will continue. Like if we run out, we'll order another 40 bins. You can, by going to this workshop, or if you have friends who couldn't make it, doing a asynchronous training, you're eligible to get one of these bins for $30. And you do that by emailing me or at havecompost@gmail.com, and I'll put that in the chat. And then you'll go to the CREC to pick it up, and you have the option of buying a wire mesh for putting underneath the bin for $3.50. So, and the reason this is currently required because if you're composting really well and it's finished compost at the bottom, you will not be attracting any rodents or anything like that. However, you're not necessarily going to get it right the first time. So especially when you're starting a bin, you're going to have food right at the bottom, and rodents can burrow in. So the wire mesh works to prevent that. So you put the wire mesh down, and then you put the bin on top of it, and there's stakes. And so that happens. And I have to say, I have one of these bins, and I started one around the fall, and had a lot of pumpkins. And I did get some squirrels chewing through the side where the air vents are. And if you also have that issue, you can just reinforce it again with the wire mesh and just put it all around. So there's ways to keep, and again, that was because it wasn't composting really. It was still just a pumpkin. And so that's why they wanted to get at it. One thing here, leaves are no longer available at Jack McDonald Field, but I personally have some extra leaves that I've shredded. And so you could also let me know if you want some extra leaves when you contact me and have compost. These are very large. Some people have said they're too large for their family, that they just can't fill it up fast enough, because it's amazing how much stuff you can put in, and then as it composts, it just shrinks. So you'll be surprised. I suggest just seeing if your neighbors want to contribute, and so then you'll get more. I try to keep a bin about 3/4 full, so that there's a good mass of material there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point as well, in terms of both just maximizing the space, but also diversity. Piles love diverse materials, and we tend to eat the same things over and over. So we are not as adventurous with our diets, and the pile will do better if you have lots of different materials in it instead of the same thing over and over. Apparently microorganisms are fairly choosy. So to Joy's point, so prepping for the pile for anyone in Haverford Township, you're going to put that mesh down first, then the bin. Then on top of the mesh, you would put down a layer of finished compost or soil. Then you'd want to, as Joy said, have some brown materials handy. She has some ready. If you have leaves left over, amazing. Shredded newspaper, shredded cardboard will work just fine. And leaves don't need to be shredded. It's great. And I'll get to, why smaller is better in a little bit, but brown bags, if you're a Whole Foods aficionado, any of that will work fine. Water, I literally will say 100 times before I finish this presentation, your pile needs water. So you have to kind of keep an eye on the water content. Materials should have the same moisture content as a wrung out sponge. It should always look a little wet. So if it looks dry and crunchy, it will slop or dramatically slow down the decomp. Some of the tools I recommend, a pitchfork, garden hose, compost aerator is something. If you have back problems and you don't have a tumbler, you get one of these bins. It looks like a corkscrew, but it's giant. You spin it around and then you pull it out. It just creates air holes in the compost. They don't cost much. They're like $20, but it can save your back if you're looking to avoid some of the labor. A compost thermometer is really helpful if you're kind of experimenting, especially if you're batch processing, like you're really trying to make things go. Understanding when you're getting temperatures and at what temperatures you're achieving can be pretty cool. If you want to track it, up to you, but it can just, when you see the temperature spikes, whatever you've been doing leading up to that, whether it's been your turning schedule or how much material, your brown to green ratio, you may want to take note of because your pile is responding in a positive way. But as Joy said, what will happen is you'll get the mix right. It will be up to the top and you'll come out in a day and it will have completely halved in terms of volume. And that means that, you know, it broke down. So it's very cool. So what goes in the pile? So you may have heard the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and that's really, and then they also say greens and browns. So you can see here on the left, we've got the nitrogen feedstock, so the green materials. These are the things that you should add to your compost pile. And then the brown carbon feedstocks. These are other things that you should add, you can add to your compost pile. And while I want these to be as black and white as possible, there is always an element of you have to kind of experiment to see what works for you, what temperatures you're achieving, what's breaking down, and also like be a little cautious. So the nitrogen, the green feedstocks, most of what comes out of our kitchen is this material, this nitrogen-rich material. So all of our fruits, all of our vegetables, seeds, nuts, nutshells. I'm talking about like almonds or like peanut shells, not seeds of any kind that you would plant outside. Coffee grounds and filter, probably the #1 thing composted with mother compost other than pizza boxes. Tea leaves, tea bags, just make sure your tea bags aren't plastic. It's crazy to say, but actually a lot of tea bags are made of plastic, which, I mean, who wants to drink plastic over hot water? But and then lawn and flower clippings. So obviously these are great nitrogen feedstocks. Lawn clippings can be a little tough to work with, so you just have to be careful. They are have very high nitrogen content. If you dump, like if you take the bag from your lawnmower and dump it into your composter, you're going to need a ton of carbon material to offset that. So just, it totally can be done, but like maybe don't throw your feedstocks in for a little bit as you carbon and turn and work through that. Citrus and banana peels. So these are things that people who compost in their backyard, some people are like, I put citrus in, it's no problem. Some people are like, I don't do citrus. The acidity, you know, in composting, you're trying to maintain a balanced pH, and depending on what's happening in your pile, the citrus could throw it off. Banana peels are just tough to break down. So if you are going to include them, I would recommend just chopping them up and make sure any stickers are off of them. And then cooked foods. So if you steam some broccoli and you put it in your compost, probably okay. If you steam some broccoli and sauteed it in oil and threw a little garlic on there, you know, maybe not, because the fat content may coat it and make it harder to break down. But cooked foods, like our furry friends like cooked foods the way we do. So that's the risk, is that kind of heightens the interest from our friends who live outside. And then dairy, fish and shellfish, meat, poultry, and weeds, as we said earlier, don't put these in your backyard system. Just don't. If you're just starting out, stay far away from it. So breads, cookies, like all of those things, do not put in your composting system. So just stick with fruits, vegetables, just the things that when you're making dinner are part of the prep, and then that goes in. And then on the carbon side, fall leaves, conifer needles, shredded paper, and newspaper. You just want to make sure there's no wax coating, shredded cardboard or egg cartons, again, not the styrofoam ones. Sawdust and pencil shavings, if you have lots of those, they're good. Dryer lint. This is probably going to come off our list very soon. So dryer lint, yes, technically it should be cotton, but a lot of time it's synthetics. And it may or may not, I don't know how much laundry everyone's doing either. So it's up to you to make the determination on what a risk this is to your pile. But there's a lot of plastic in our poly blend clothes, and that's going to go into your compost. So that's a judgment call. We do currently accept it, but as more and more research comes out, it probably will not be accepted by mother compost. And then hair and nail clippings, human and animal. This can be great if you have a dog. It's like, what do you do with all the hair? Can be a carbon source and throw it right in there. Fireplace ash, also compostable. Just if you put it all, like if you're cleaning it out for the season right now and it's full, you got to kind of sprinkle it in. Don't dump it in there. It'll clump everything up. Really learned that one the hard way. And eggshells, I recommend grinding them or like food processing them. Otherwise, you're going to kind of see them sprinkled throughout your finished compost almost always. That really depends on like how much that bothers you. There's kind of no risk to applying an eggshell, you know, a little shell on your garden. And then straw. It's just so dense and bulky that wouldn't recommend using large amounts of it in your compost. So say you had some on the lawn because you've been reseeding and then it kind of got mixed up in your clippings. I think that's fine, but I wouldn't throw a hay bale into your composting system. And the same with corn stalks and branches. They're just too big. They're too bulky. They're not going to fit for the most part. And it won't work. So we don't recommend you putting them into your pile for your backyard system. Joy, do you want to throw anything else in here?
Sure. Yeah, I would really not recommend the dryer lint. And then the other thing, I did try to start some seeds in an egg carton this year, and the egg carton clearly had a plastic lining on the inside. So I would be cautious of egg cartons. Like water wouldn't soak in. It was pretty crazy. So then the other thing is there is a cabinet company in Philadelphia that always has sawdust. And if you get the bins through me, I'll put that like where to get Browns. It will be in the email. But yeah, they advertise on the Craigslist. So and you could just go and pick up lots of you know, non-treated wood sawdust.
Awesome. That's huge. All right. And then step 5, tips for adding the materials. So I mentioned earlier chopping things up, and it will help things decompose much, much quicker if you chop up, you know, your broccoli stalk. So when it's going into your backyard, the smaller the material can be, the quicker it's going to break down, which also helps mitigate pest issues, et cetera, et cetera. So like Joy's example with the pumpkin, a pumpkin takes a really long time to break down, right? It's huge. So once you carve it, once you take everything out of it, then it starts to collapse on itself. But pumpkins can take a really long time. If you throw a corn cob in your backyard pile by itself, it's going to take a really long time and probably multiple rounds in your bin before it goes. But so we're basically setting the table for the microorganisms to come in and eat. So if we send this broccoli stalk in, it's just it's a cylinder, right? There's like 4 different surface areas for things to eat from. But if we chop it all up, we're creating all of these different surface areas for microorganisms, which helps get them fired up. And then again, just starts to mitigate the issue of your food scraps sitting for an extended period of time, which you do not want. So chopping them up fine will help them break down faster. A healthy compost pile should have more carbon than nitrogen, or 3 to 1 carbon and nitrogen ratio. So the general rule of thumb in like our slower go would be 2 to 3 times the carbon to 1 part green. So carbon, nitrogen, brown, green. Batch processing, if you've got high heats going, you can get a little tighter than that. But for anyone who's starting, I would say 3 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So that's, if you have a compost bin like the one you're seeing in this photo, that black thing comes out and you dump your kitchen scraps, you fill it 3 more times with carbon and put that in there. Also, when I was talking to Joy earlier in the week, she told me a really cool tip. Someone said when they fill that compost bin, they fill the inside of it with water and then dump that in their compost bin, which I thought was amazing, because if you don't feel like adding a step, then you're essentially watering your bin as you're adding your materials. So 2 steps in one. You always want to make sure that after you've added materials, everything is covered with a layer of brown. So if that means you dump your food scraps in, you add 2 parts carbon, you mix everything around, and then you throw that 3 parts carbon on last to cover it, that makes all the sense in the world to me. You don't want to leave any food exposed in the air, even if you have a closed bin system, because bugs can get through anything. So, temperature does matter. We're entering the season where it's going to be warmer. You're going to want to turn your pile daily, especially again, if it's one of these brown bins. During the colder months, you don't have to turn as frequently, because you're dissipating heat when you turn a little bit, and the colder temperatures, you kind of want the heat to build. Below freezing, don't turn. Nothing's really happening there anyway. An active pile with the right mix of nutrients will break down over a period of 2 to 3 weeks. And a good rule of thumb, turn after adding new materials. So immediately aerate the pile to get that new material in. Once it's out of the active phase, it should be removed. Like, you should scrape it out of the bottom and move it to another container to the ground for a little bit, called curing. So this is especially important if it's coming out of a tumbler. You want it to make contact with the ground and sit for a little before you spread it on your gardens. This is a hugely important stage in commercial composting. It's less intense in backyard composting because the temperatures that you've achieved are not as high over as long a period of time. Compost is finished. Now what? The best time to apply compost are spring, right now, and in the fall before the first frost. So typically it's a 2 to 3 inch layer to fully amend the soil. If your soil's in really good shape and you're just trying to add, a little bit of nutrients, 1 inch may be fine. That's really up to you. If you don't know what's going on with your soil, and that's kind of why you're looking to composting, you may want to get your soil tested. The Penn State Extension has really inexpensive tests, and that way you'll know exactly what's happening in your home soil. Compost is amazing in that it acts like a time-release vitamin, so it will slowly dispense the nutrients over time, whereas synthetic fertilizers tend to hyper-fertilize the plant. Compost actually feeds the soil, which then goes into the plants. Which plants benefit most? That was a trick question. They all do. As I said, it feeds the soil, which benefits plants. So it can be applied to lawns, especially if you're reseeding or if you're aerating your lawn. It's a great way to add organic matter back. Raised beds, a 1 to 2 inch layer. You can plant seedlings right into compost in a bed. And for potted plants, you would just add a little top layer to add nutrients back to the soil. And last but not least, these question marks. These are the 4 things that we typically hear from with people who are having some trouble with their composting adventures. So pile stinks, usually due to a high nitrogen content. I would add more brown materials and turn. Would not add more nitrogen or more kitchen scraps until the smell is under control. But what happens if you don't have enough carbon in there? The nitrogen materials will clump together, and it's not pretty. Pile isn't doing anything and materials are just sitting here. Usually this is because it needs water. So if you're just looking at what looks like a big pile of leaves, it's just gone dormant and needs water, and then also aerate. Air and water, just like us. Compost piles, just like us. Pile has bugs or pests. So this is tricky because bugs are actually decomposers and part of the decomposition process in composting. So worms are great. and most insects in normal amounts. I've seen compost piles with like a little bit of an ant problem. But, you know, for the most part, if you turn and get the process working, those things will sort themselves out, and worms are always welcome, right? You want to keep fresh wet waste well covered. And sprinkling just dry leaves on the top is not going to get it done, especially not in the summer when it's hot and the flies are out. If your pile has been compromised, if furry friends have appeared, you may want to, like, unless, like Joy said, you can specifically figure out exactly what is happening and why and fix it, you probably want to take down, like move it. So you want to take down the pile. I would dig a hole and put the materials that you have in it and cover it, and then move your container to somewhere else if you want to start again, because it has been my experience that once they find something, they're loath to let it go. So that would be my recommendation if that's the problem you came here to talk about tonight. And then never getting finished product out of a pile. I think there's 2 tumblers. This is very, very common complaint. I know we talked about it earlier. Usually you just have to stop adding materials and water and burn it for a little bit and let things settle. The other thing to consider is just the expectation, right? As you're going to put a volume of material in and the output is going to be small. It's going to reduce in size dramatically in terms of the volume. So, you know, it's not going to be like you put this much volume in and get this much out. But you will get, what you get back is very nutrient dense, and a little goes a long way. So I think those are the 2 things. These are the 4 things that we typically hear about: never getting finished product. In those bins too, it can be hard to kind of scrape it out of the bottom, but it is possible. Your other option would be just to lift the bin and move it, and then shimmy out the mesh for you guys. And that also could be a way to just then have the compost ready to go. So that's it. Compost, feeding the soil. So I'm going to head over to the chat now and just answer any questions, and then we can certainly open it up. Sort of total beginner here. Oh, Katie, welcome. And no worries at all. Delco waste is currently incinerated. Yes, that's right. Yes, so bones and animal waste, it really just attracts a lot of rodent interest. And if you're not achieving high temperatures, like the odors and pest mitigation can be severe. So I wouldn't recommend it, especially in areas this dense. I mean, Haverford Township already kind of has some pest issues too. So that could bring some serious furry friends. And that's why we don't recommend it. Most of the time that's a recipe for kind of an invasion.
I'd like to add too, if on the compost bins that most of them, this one I think, and other ones, they even imprinted on the plastic will say no meat. No, I mean, this is not just like a township thing. Like this, it's not recommended for a backyard bin.
No, that is like backyard composting. Like, don't do it. Don't do manures. Don't do animal waste. Don't do bones. It's not going to break down, and most likely you're going to have a rodent issue. There we go. Joy's already covered it. Screen material. Perfect. All right, Poppy, thank you for sharing. Joy. I'm not really sure on this one. I mean, my guess is it would probably be green, unless it's been like chopped and dead. I don't, Joy, do you want to jump in there? Did you just?
I looked up this question in so I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Rodale Institute. It's a regenerative, I think regenerative agricultural institute that's been around since the 70s in our area and is like literally writes the book on composting and also other regenerative agriculture. And they have in their book that dried grass is considered brown. But I would be cautious.
Yeah, so that's, I would say anything that's like been, I guess if it's still in the ground. All right, coffee grounds, you know, they're brown in color, consider green for composting. It's at that point, there's no food left in, like when you're curing it and it's laying on the ground, there's nothing, there should be no food in it. There should be nothing that attracts a pest. So if you're still seeing food, those would be called overs. And this is another tool you may want to get. You can get a screener, sort of like you're panning for gold, and get the compost out. And then anything that's too big to go through that screen, you can add back to the pile in the container. So finished compost is not attractive to pests in any way. It's like mulch. It's not attractive to pests in any way. What services are provided by Mother Compost? Hilda, thank you so much for asking. So our service, we pick up the containers every other week. We clean the containers and add a fresh liner. We take all the materials to Linville Orchards where it's turned into compost. And then in the spring, our subscribers can register. I apologize, my family's so loud. Our subscribers can register to receive up to 60 pounds of finished compost in the spring. So we really provide a resource for people short on space or time to still compost at home and redirect all of their organic waste from landfills and incinerators. And we try to make it really, really easy so that more people will do it, because we recognize just not everyone has the capacity to manage a backyard system. In addition, because we are doing commercial, we can take things like dairy, baked goods, pits, peels, you know, like avocado seeds, pizza boxes, which you could rip up and put in your backyard compost probably. But there's a little less guesswork in what goes in the pile, and we take care of most of the service for you. So that's what we do. And then we also work with businesses, a lot of faith-based organizations, local schools, to help redirect their organic waste as well. So actually, we just crossed 2 million pounds like 2 days ago. I just found out. So since we started in 2008, which is really exciting. So that is Mother Compost, and soon there will be, can we talk about the?
So yeah, I can talk about it. So Havre Township submitted a grant and got it from the USDA for expanding compost. That composting in our town in Havre Township. Several different things are going to come out of that. One is that will help pay for the backyard compost bins and these seminars, and then also part of it will be some incentives for people to hire services. So just like Gwen told you there about Mother Compost, there is another service also. There's only one other service right now that services Havre Township that's called named Easy Composting. So if you hire one of those services, you'll get 2 free months that's paid for by the grant. And that's just to give the incentive for people. You know, backyard composting is not going to be for everyone. We absolutely recognize that. I love doing it. One of the reasons I love doing it is because I love getting the product from it and putting it on my garden. I've also learned that not a lot of people garden, but also there's a lot of people who compost just to get it to go away. And you can add the compost as You could put it after you screen it. If I don't usually screen it, but if I was going to put it onto my lawn, I would probably screen it first, and then you just put it into the little wheelie thing, and then you just spread it like you would spread fertilizer. So there's lots of different ways to use it. I really like using compost because it on my garden, because you don't have to water as often. So I usually add compost about 3 times a year to my garden. And especially in the summertime, I can see a huge difference right after I add because it absorbs so much moisture. And I just want to add too that in the when you're starting up a bin and there's no really finished compost in there, you're going to have to add a lot more water at that point than you do later on. Once you have some of that finished compost already in there, it's going to retain the moisture better. It's not going to be just adding water to dry leaves, which doesn't retain the moisture very well. So you do have to do a little bit of work, like Gwen said. It just depends. You could be a complete lazy composter and just have the lasagna, never worry about anything. And if you're just one family, you might never ever fill up that whole thing. It depends, what you want to do and what your reasons for doing it.
Yes, and that I'm going back to the baking thing, but we could all right now walk away with the same cookie recipe in our hands, right? And all of us would make something different. Depends on the ingredients we have in our home. It depends on the oven that we're using. It depends so many variables. Composting is the same. There's a framework for how to do it, but everyone's going to do it a little differently. The best part about that is there's no wrong way. There's a couple things like you definitely don't want to do, like the animal thing, the bones and stuff, but really it is sort of your experiment in what works best in your yard and with the sun that you get, with the way the rainfall and the water comes onto your property. So don't be intimidated, because it's really up to you. It's your adventure. What about adding topsoil or any soil if you don't have enough browns? If you're really in a pinch and you need to cover waste, sure. But I don't think this is going to add the carbon to the system that it needs. So I would, again, if it's versus leaving food scraps on top and covering it, absolutely cover it. But I would recommend finding some carbon materials to add to it. And that could be shredded newspaper works awesome. Shredded brown bag works well. So I don't know, Joy, is that something you've ever experimented with? I've never done that.
The only time I've added anything other than I use leaves as my browns, is when it's good to start with
a base,
something, in there. Did you talk about compost starter at all?
I didn't, no.
So that's one thing that that you can add a little bit of, and basically it's the same reason you would want to, if you empty out a bin ever, you want to leave some compost behind, because that compost has the microorganisms there. Like the microorganisms don't have to find the compost bin, right, and then get in high quantity. They're the ones that do the processing are already in that finished compost. It's the same thing for the compost starter. It's just adding those microorganisms or the things that the microorganisms really like right in there. It's not necessary, but it can get a pile going faster.
Bill, I was literally thinking the same thing. I mean, there's almost never a moment where I'm not thinking of sourdough bread, but yes, it is the same exact idea as a starter. You can get compost starter. I mean, you can order that on Amazon. You can get it from your local garden store. I mean, Joy, do you
It's
have
not
any?
necessary, but it might speed things up when you're first getting a pile going.
Right, it can, because it immediately introduces the microorganisms to the environment so that they don't have to kind of find you. But yeah, you can get them anywhere. It is 8 o'clock, so I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think we had this book for an hour. But thank you guys for coming. Thank you so much for the questions. And as always, thank you to Joy, who's helped create this program for Haverford Township, who helped get this grant funding and, you know, helps continue to champion composting in Haverford Township. So thank you, Joy. And the recording will be available. So if you have any other questions, if you want to check out Mother Compost, we are on Instagram, Facebook, and out in the world. You'll see the trucks rolling around now, probably, no doubt. And thank you guys so much for coming. It was great to be with you.
Thank you.